Hey, Ace and Beaky here, out in the beautiful outdoors in the middle of the night, not in my dreams, wide awake, with lovely ambience from the road next to me. I don't mind. I hope you don't either. The thing is that I kind of wanted to bring up something that wasn't just a microwaved rehash of an opinion I had about something that was probably more yesterday's news. Still relevant today, but prime was in the recent past. Let's talk a little bit about Nazis. Now, I understand that with a lot of people, Nazi is a buzzword that either gets people mad or makes them roll their eyes. And usually, whenever people get mad, it's because they're mad that they exist, which of course isn't a good thing at all. And they're extremely frustrated that not everybody else is panicking about them like they are. And then the people who roll their eyes at the word Nazi are half justified because it's a buzzword that's been thrown around and a lot of people have falsely accused other people of being Nazis. Usually the left, but some on the right too. And the thing is that they've kind of rolled their eyes from people that they don't like crying wolf about it so much that they've actually become part of the problem by not acknowledging that it exists. Let me start off by talking about Nazis in the same way C.S. Lewis talked about demons. You can go with two extremes that are both equally wrong with demons, and I think it applies to Nazis in today's climate. One is to not believe that they exist at all. The denial. One is to not believe that they exist and to not realize that they can be a problem. The other is to have an unhealthy obsession with them, a morbid curiosity that doesn't know when to quit, doesn't know when to lay off, and doesn't realize that it's time to think about other things. Understanding this analogy that C.S. Lewis made about demons and then applying it to Nazis, I think will help us have a good starting point. Now, the thing is that we need to kind of learn about them so that we can have, be able to prevent them whenever they want to do something bad. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, so we could try to nip this in the bud, but the thing is there will always be these idiots around, so the best thing to do is to kind of prevent them and isolate them from being able to recruit vulnerable members of society to their madness. But the other thing is to also just kind of understand the nature of the beast. Are Nazis today the exact same as they were back then? Well, I mean, probably in the important stuff of how wrong and evil and stupid they are, naturally, of course. But at the same time, do they work in the same way? Are they just another ripoff of what we have? And is going against, are the people who hate Nazis the same as they were back in the day? And the answer to all of these is yes and no. There are Nazis nowadays, and there's even been kind of a resurgence of white supremacists and white nationalism. The left is correct on this. The right wing is wrong to ignore it. However, the left wing has also contributed to the problem. Part of what gives Nazis recruiting material is that they can present themselves as the underdog. Because the left wing has had more influence among the youth lately, that kind of makes them mainstream. And there's nothing wrong with that. That doesn't make a person bad, but like anything, popularity can corrupt people. The left wing has been very much on the warpath lately in a culture war. They've been on the offense. They've been kind of authoritarian and uncompromising. And like Chinese water torture, they don't necessarily cause as much straight up damage as an actual bad person on the right would, but they do drive people fucking crazy. And I say this because I don't want a reactionary thing, but it's wrong. If there's a reactionary or fascist movement, the right wing needs to understand that they tend to gravitate towards them and deal with it. But the left wing needs to understand that reactionaries don't really exist without the left fucking up to a degree. That doesn't mean that I'm trying to just pin it all on one side or the other. It takes two to tango, and there's a lot of nuance in this situation, and I don't necessarily want to get into a huge philosophy speech about every last little detail. Because even though we could have a problem like what they had leading up towards World War II, the players and the conditions and the setting are still different. One thing that I heard a smart person say is that what led up to World War II was kind of like an uncompromising narcissism on the left and a fundamentalism on the right. And even though the left and the right think that they stand for the same things that good old grandpa and grandma stood for in the good old days, things are a little bit different. They have switched places in some areas. Right now, I would say that if anybody has a problem with fundamentalism, it's the left. They're fanatical. They're Puritans. And if anybody has a problem with narcissism, it's the right, in the fact that they've kind of given up on their conservative and Christian values, and they've basically become hedonistic Marxists with a right-wing sex change. Now, concerning Nazis, this is one of those things where it's a problem that we need to deal with and we need to acknowledge exists, but we have to have a cool head. We also have to understand that even though it's very, very, very wrong for people in the right wing to just immediately dismiss it, and that it's very, very wrong for people in the right wing to kind of be what they accuse Muslims of being. Some people at the beginning of the War on Terror, usually right wing, said a moderate Muslim is just somebody who wants somebody else to be the terrorist. That's kind of fucked up, and maybe this is a little bit of karma, because now a lot of liberals are treating a lot of conservatives like conservatives are just somebody that wants somebody else to be the Nazi. I don't think conservatives mean to do that, but it does kind of play out that way sometime. However, one thing that the liberal left also needs to acknowledge is how they have been so insufferable at times that even people who would normally be center left or even far left, even people who are just an older fashioned version of left wing, have gotten so fed up with their Anita Sarkeesian, Kathleen Kennedy insanity with the tea parties of the left, basically. With the puritanical, theocratic-minded people of the left, the people with dogmatic, religious, prude personalities, the people with a religious personality disorder, but their religion is political correctness on the left, that like Chinese water torture, even if they didn't actually hurt you bad, they drove you fucking crazy. And the thing is that doesn't mean that, if a liberal comes up to me and says, check your privilege, and accuses me of being a racist and all that, it doesn't give me the right to become a Nazi. It doesn't give me the right to even become a reactionary. It doesn't even give me the right to become somebody who might be center-left but has like a reactionary attitude because somebody who is a different kind of liberal pissed me off. But it does mean that the liberal left needs to take responsibility for the fact that they put the temptation there. That the liberal left is so blinded by basically kind of like a form of Marxism, fused with Steven Universe, that they can't acknowledge that they did play a role in kind of alienating and isolating people on the fence over to the other side. And people kind of saw this coming a mile away, is that during the Obama administration, and I don't blame Obama, but I do blame some of his supporters, not because of Obama, but because of them, that they themselves alienated a lot of people, and whenever they were so uncompromising and intolerant of people who were right of Marx, right of Stalin, it kind of silenced all the people in the center left and center right, and then the people that got attracted to the debate were the actual racists. So now it kind of seems to me that the only opinions that you're hearing are people who are borderline Marxist and people who are genuinely racist or just plain reactionary. Whether they're straight up fascist or not is kind of up for debate. That word gets thrown around. I don't think many people on the right are true fascists, but they might, if they feel so threatened by the left, they might tolerate fascists. And I kind of feel that that's kind of is what led up to World War II. Now, the thing is, like I said, some things are different. The whole fundamentalist versus narcissism thing, in my opinion, has switched. But there is one thing that did kind of lead up to, Nazi Germany in World War II. As I've stated in a previous video, Nazi Germany, before it became Nazi Germany, was actually fairly progressive, but it felt threatened by communism, which had killed a shit ton of people. But the thing is that what even led up to that and made it even worse is economic strife. Economic strife leads up to racial strife. And right now, we have a government that has stated ever since the 60s that it wants to use a divide and conquer tactic, that it promotes division in people to become so extreme, so tribalistic, so uncompromising, and so intolerant of one another that everybody is isolated and hates one another, and then they want the government to help slay people that they don't like. I'll get back to you in a second. Now, there is one thing that I do kind of want to bring up with the Nazis that I think a lot of people kind of need to take a step back and realize about it. Something that's not 100% on the narrative of the left and the right wing. It sounds like it might be one or the other, or jumping back and forth between both, but it tries to transcend it. And when I say transcend left and right, it doesn't mean that you totally lose yourself and that you totally compromise all of your left-wing beliefs or your right-wing beliefs. You just realize that it's not the final authority. You realize that being left-wing or being right-wing doesn't define you as a person as much as being a good person or a bad person. And even if you have left-wing views or right-wing views, that you shouldn't be totally loyal to a party. Now, with that being said, let's kind of take a look at who benefits from this. First of all, let's kind of take a look at everything that's happened whenever Nazis have been doing so good at hiding who they are, and then out of the blue they just seem to bust out of nowhere, and they seem to basically ruin the reputation of whatever group of people that they burst out of, like a chest burster from the Aliens movie. Dave Champion did an excellent video on how he was criticizing both Antifa and the actual racists, whether that included KKK and Nazis, and and actual white supremacist groups. They don't all believe on the same thing. KKK and Nazis aren't all on the same side. Actual Nazis would probably have half of the KKK members gassed because they wouldn't view them as pure. And like I said, KKK and Nazis are both bad for the wrong reason, but they don't want exactly the same thing. Concerning immoral stuff they do, but concerning like the world they want to create, which is fucked up either way, but KKK and Nazis want different things. They're not the exact same thing. But the thing is that I wanted to point out is that it really seems kind of almost hilarious where the Nazis just find it appropriate to either hide or to pop up and show their true face at the last minute. It also seems to be kind of the same thing with with the flat earthers. And that really seems to me that it seems that Nazis are attracted to things that are actually against fascism, and then they want to show up, something that would be casually against fascism, and then they want to show up, and then they wait until the last minute whenever said group of people have a demonstration or a meeting or whatever, and they show up and they make them all look bad. And everybody else that was in that original group that the Nazis infiltrated are like, what? Where did all these fucking tiki torches come from? Let's take a look at this. There's been a hilarious article about Nazis infiltrating furries, Nazis infiltrating bronies. And I've noticed that even before that, and the same with the Flat Earth Society, is that like if there's a conspiracy theory group, and it seems to lean a little more right than left, it's made up of people who are both left and right wing. It seems that whenever there's like a conspiracy theory group that's gaining traction, suddenly, out of nowhere, a shit ton of Flat Earth Society people want to come in, take it over, and make it all about them. And the thing is that these conspiracy theorists, they tolerated some of the flat earthers as just kind of like a side thing. It's like, okay, we don't hate you for believing that, but that's not what we're all about. You can believe that, but you can't, but don't hijack it. And then they hijacked it. And that there were actually there was a group of people who were, they were anti-government conspiracy theorists. The last thing they wanted was an authoritarian government. And then it seemed at the last minute, suddenly there were a bunch of people that came out of nowhere that they just started waving the swastika around and started screaming the N-word, saying Das Juden. And I mean, they were always kind of there, but it kind of seems like they like to just kind of show up at the last minute and then make whatever group of people that they've infiltrated look bad. And I've kind of realized that maybe that's the point. Let's look at the pattern here, okay? The Nazis have tried to infiltrate libertarian groups. Libertarians, probably the last thing they want is fascism. Think about what they want. Libertarians, probably the last thing they want is fascism. But the thing is that there were libertarians, and these people were kind of crypto-fascists. They downplayed the swastika. They hid who they were. And the libertarians said, hey, we're going to have a meeting at a hotel or something. And then a bunch of Nazis showed up, and some of them were members, but they didn't realize that they were Nazis. And the Nazis said, hey, we're going to show up, and we're basically going to take over your meeting and convert it to ours. And we said, no, you're not. Get the fuck out of here. We don't want anything to do with you. I don't even know how you got into the first place. You didn't show your true colors until now. And then the Nazis said, yeah, well, we're going to show up no matter what. And if you try to stop us, we'll bring guns. And then the libertarians are like, well, you know what? Well, if you bring guns, then we'll bring guns. And then the person who was overseeing the entire meeting was like, oh shit, both sides are bringing guns. I've got to cancel the event so that nothing happens. Do you see what's going on here? There's people, and the same thing happens on the left. I won't go into detail, but let's just say that some of the people who want affordable college and health care, suddenly a bunch of idiots show up out of nowhere that nobody knows from jack squat, and those idiots start screaming free health care and start acting the fool. Or that sometimes there's some people who are Black Lives Matters, and these individuals are trying to have a peaceful protest, and then somebody starts breaking shit, and they're like, hey dude, we're not about that, stop breaking shit, stop starting fights, stop all that bullshit. And then whenever they try to calm the guy down, he pulls a gun on him, he pulls a badge on him. It's an undercover cop, and he was trained by the Israelis to do that because they do that to the Palestinians all the time. Whenever there's a Palestinian protest and it is peaceful, the Israelis want to make them look bad so they can justify firing on the crowd. So they send Israeli soldiers who look like Arabs to pretend to be Palestinian protesters, to throw rocks at the Israelis, so now the Israelis have an opportunity to crack down hard on the Palestinian protesters. I mean, this is nothing new. I mean, it even happened in the Bible whenever Paul and them were preaching the message of the gospel, and then some people who didn't like what they were saying sent a bunch of troublemakers to stir up the crowd so that the Romans would crack down on everybody and their message would be demonized, vilified. So the thing is that there are agent provocateurs, and they infiltrate Black Lives Matter with idiots, with undercover cops, with Marxists, and they infiltrate libertarians and Republicans with Nazis, and they even try to infiltrate Bronies and Furries with Nazis. And the thing is that you have to understand that Dave Champion did an excellent video. I would defer to you to go to Dave Champion's video that he posted a couple of years back about how Nazis started out as kind of biker gangs. They worked like organized crime, but they realized to get successful in these heated times, they would have to get political. They would have to downplay the swastika, and they would just have to present themselves as people who were simply libertarian or conservative or Republican or whatever. And that they would even have to present themselves as having liberal sympathies so that they could recruit people who had been alienated by society or who had been alienated by the left to be part of their little group. They would be grooming them for that. Now, the liberal left likes to get all on a high horse and say, see, Nazis are everywhere. And I'm like, liberals, and you're talking about conservatives when you say this, if society creates its own criminals, liberal societies can create their own reactionaries. So you have to take some responsibility for this too. You have to practice what you preach and be genuinely compassionate. It's the same thing I would say towards religious conservatives that have a bunch of people hate Christianity because they allow their churches to become too harsh, too judgmental, too hypocritical, and sort of a social mafia. Okay? So this is something that you're going to have to pay attention to, and you're going to have to realize, liberals, that even though I am definitely against the reactionaries and I don't want them to win, if you want to be on the right side of history, if you want to be part of the solution, you have to practice what you preach. Now, in defense of both sane liberals and sane conservatives, most people, when they turn off that damn TV, when they get off that damn computer, and I love TV and computers, but, culture war bullshit, social justice warriors, cultural justice warriors. The left, the far left, and the far right are two peas in a pod. The thing is that whenever we get off of the raw mosh pit that is the internet, and we start just talking to people casually, we'll actually realize that most people are more harmonious than the media would allow us to believe. That the media has nothing but fear and divide and conquer tactics, and since people want to be on the internet more and away from mainstream media more, they want to be with mainstream media less, then the mainstream media sends bots and paid trolls on both sides to stir up dissension, so that the loudest voices in the room are people screaming these passive-aggressive, borderline Marxist or borderline fascistic comments. And it's not even the fact that it's far right or far left, it's about the fact that it's toxic. It's about the fact that it's hateful. The CIA and FBI has said they're going to do this for a long time, that whenever there was that, I forget what it was called, but in the 60s there was that campus protest against the Vietnam War and a bunch of students got shot. A lot of people think that it's like, oh, those evil National Guard right-wingers gunned down the innocent students, or, oh, those students were acting crazy, so we right-wingers, we have nothing left to do but shoot down liberals whenever they say something we don't want to hear. Well, the thing is that even though there's, something to be said about both sides' one-sided story, there's a third piece of the puzzle that you missed. Whenever the protests were happening, they were getting a little heated and bad, but nobody had been shot yet. And about halfway through, some older protesters came out of nowhere. These were older people. Nobody knew who they were, really. And they came in, and it's almost like they professionally fucked it up and set people to get shot. So I'm seeing a pattern here. We need to start catching the wolves in sheep's clothing. We need to start realizing that sometimes people are there and it's like their entire existence is to undermine a valid line of thought and undermine valid discussion. And the thing is that they could be extremists acting on their own, or they could be government agents. And I know a lot of people don't like to blame the government because that makes you sound like a conspiracy theorist, but if you actually look, this is based on fact. It's not so much conspiracy theory as it is conspiracy researcher. Meaning that, yeah, we don't have all the evidence in the world, but we have a lot more than you give us fucking credit for. And you need to look into this, because they've been saying for the longest time that they're trying to balkanize us culturally. So please, for heaven's sake, try to understand what this whole speech has been about, and concerning Nazis and, to a lesser extent, the fundamentalists and narcissists on both sides, that it seems that a lot of these Nazis and flat earthers and people who kind of look like the stereotypical SJW, they seem to be less of the grassroots organization, and they seem to be the establishment wolves in sheep's clothing pretending to be grassroots activists. That, that Nazis have been trying to infiltrate liberty-minded groups so that they could corrupt it with racism. So even that if the libertarians gained more ground, the libertarians would promote the police state and hate black people and cause more problems. And that whenever the left wing might bring up a valid point about college and healthcare being too damn expensive, a bunch of rich, swarmy kids that nobody knew will show up and make everybody look like an ass and preach socialism so that conservative hearts will be hardened and they won't show compassion for their own kids. Or it could be an undercover cop. And just to reiterate, one thing I heard from both what sounded like reasonable cops and reasonable Black Lives Matter protesters, that the reasonable people on both sides seem to pay attention that 70% of the rioting and looting wasn't that organic. They were from the outside. There were those paid protesters Looking at you, George Soros, many of them white. They were opportunistic out-of-town looters that realized that whenever there's a protest happening, if it descends into a riot, they're there to steal TVs. They're not there because they're part of the group. Maybe they have sympathies, but it doesn't matter. They're vultures waiting for the lions to kill a gazelle. And then some of the people who were agent provocateurs were undercover cops, because there are racists and Nazis and KKK that have joined the police force. There are outside foreign invaders that are trying to invade us by joining the police force, soldiers from other countries trying to invade us by joining the police force, and a lot of them have been trained by Israel to give us the Palestinian treatment. And the one thing that they've learned from Israel is to infiltrate the crowd, turn it violent, and then make them go into a trap so that the police or the military can mow them down. So the thing is that you have to pay attention to that. Once you realize that it's all a play, then you start understanding where to judge people and where to cut people some slack. I hope that this has planted some seeds in your mind so that you can have a sharp mind but a soft heart, as opposed to a soft mind and a hard heart. That you can embrace having a cool head and a warm heart so that you can make good decisions with your heart in the right place, as opposed to a hot head and a cold heart to where, you're constant, where you're angry and you don't care about other people. That's not where we need to be. We don't necessarily need to be hot-blooded or cold-blooded. We need to be warm-blooded. We need to have a warm heart and a cool head. So cool heads make good decisions, which is why they prevail, and warm hearts is what it's all about. That's what the cool head is there to protect and to guide, is to make the way for a warm heart. So please, if you're a Republican, before you're tempted to hate everybody who's a millennial, before you're tempted to see all protesters as rioters, before you're tempted to see all BLM activists as Marxists or terrorists, and before you're tempted to see all Muslims as terrorists, understand that our government has probably infiltrated all of those groups and sent agent provocateurs to undermine whatever legitimate message they have. And if you're on the left wing, and if you're tempted to see all furries, bronies, gamers, manga, and all that as Nazis, understand that they didn't ask for that, and that they've been infiltrated by people who are trying to undermine something good that they have to offer to you and to society. Understand that, please. Try to understand that a lot of people, that if the libertarian movement or the Republican Party has gone bad, it's not because they chose to be bad, it's because they've been infiltrated. And probably a group that you care about has been infiltrated. And it doesn't mean that you're bad, but you got to watch out for wolves in sheep's clothing. There's a bigger game. There is a Palpatine playing both sides of the fence, like in Star Wars. And I'll leave on that. Thank you so much.